I 100% expect there to be disruption. Already we have AI that can plausibly replace large chunks of specific white-collar tasks.
We've already significantly overproduced elites, and I worry that that will get worse.
Our legal infrastructure needs to keep up. We're accelerating in AI progress, and we're decelerating in Supreme Court resolutions of cases or whatever.
Manus, the Chinese AI agent. What does the future of political economy in a agent ecosystem look like, both in general and in a China AI context? Today, to discuss, we have on a very esteemed panel of Shawn Wang, aka Swix, the editor of the Latent Space podcast and newsletter, Dean Ball of Mercatus, and Rohit Krishnan, who writes the Strange Loop Canon substack. Welcome to ChinaTalk, everyone. So this past Friday, launched only through an English language video, a startup founded in 2022 by a Wuhan native who was born in 1992 and is part of the sort of like generation of more like product-focused startup founders of the mid-2010s. And his second go launched this product called Manus, which is ostensibly an AI agent where, you tell it to do something and then it can kind of like interact with the internet and pretend, it is like a person clicking around to, book you a restaurant or change a reservation or, who knows, maybe one day take over the world through Chrome. It had a really remarkable rollout where the hype built to a pretty dramatic extent over the weekend. And the product as well seems to be more competitive than the similar offerings that we've seen so far out of OpenAI and Anthropic. So with that context, Shawn, what were your first impressions of what Manus was able to build?
My first impressions was that it's basically a very well executed OpenAI operator clone. Maybe clone is not generous enough. Maybe it's just a straight out competitor. Maybe they're working on it independently, whatever. But it can really browse pages for you and execute commands for you. And it seems like on some tests that people in the latent space community were running side by side with operator versus Manus. Manus actually came out consistently on top, which is backed by the benchmarks that they hit, which is the Facebook Gaia benchmark. That it tries to benchmark, agents in the real world. So I think it's very promising. I'm a little bit suspicious at how well the launch was executed with, influencer-only invite codes and then obviously people writing very breathless threads. We've seen this very, very many times in the agent world. But this one, at least people seem to be able to use, which is nice.
I think the thing that interested me the most was that all of the previous conversations we have had about China have been about models, right? How good are their models? How much money do they have? How many GPUs do they have, etc. And we are now talking about a product, because the closest to a product that came from DeepSeek was their API is really good, their model is exceptional, but their interface is just the same old, whatever, chat interface that you would see. This time, we've been talking about agents ad nauseum for a long period of time. I think we still are living in the West under the umbrella of the fear of AI agents, which is why we are still afraid to give most models internet search in a proper fashion. But it is amazing to see that the first really strong competitor has actually come out from China, arguably better, slightly worse, definitely comparable to Operator. And they made it work with a combination of Western and Chinese models. Underlying it is basically Claude and fine-tunes of Qwen. So that kind of changes the product game as far as I can see.
Yeah, I mean, so I did not get an invite code myself. I was able to use someone else's account for a brief period of time. And I ran it through my favorite computer use benchmark that I've organically discovered, which is trying to book a train ticket on Amtrak.com. Operator cannot do this. Consistently it fails at this. Manus got it on its first shot. And so that says something to me. And a lot of the other demos I've seen of the product are quite, seem like quite impressive and seem like things that if I saw Operator do them, I would be surprised based on my perception of Operator's kind of reliability and competence. And things like that. So yeah, I mean, like, this is not a story about some shocking technological innovation. This is not a story about, cracked DeepSeek, unfathomable geniuses, as Jack Clark says, figuring out some new truth, about the nature of deep learning. This is good product execution of a style that was, that's like pretty relatable to sort of like your kind of Y Combinator-y 2015 era startup. It's a well-built product that works pretty well. It has lots of flaws and glitches, like all of these computer use agents do. But the thing that's interesting to me is that this is actually an advancement of capabilities, at least from what I've seen, right? Like, you could say that DeepSeek is a more impressive technical achievement, that R1 and V3 are like more impressive in some fundamental sense. I think that's probably true. But this DeepSeek R1 was not better than OpenAI O1. At best, it was comparable. This is better than what I've seen from Operator. Maybe comparable, but I kind of just think unambiguously better. And I think thinking about why that is the case is a really interesting question.
So, Shawn, you just hosted a wonderful week-long AI agent conference in New York City. What's your take on why no one in the West got to this first?
There are a lot of skeptics still of agents, even among the agent builders. And I think that people are ranging the spectrum in terms of the levels of autonomy that they're trying to create. And the general sense or consensus is that lower levels of autonomy are more successful. So like Cursor being an agent, it's now worth $10 billion, whereas the kind of people that worked on Baby AGI and AutoGPT back in the day are now no longer working on those things. So generally, the sense has been working on like level 4, level 5 autonomy agents has been not a good idea, and level 1 and 2, more sort of lane assist type autonomy agents has been the play. But obviously, I think with the rise of reasoning models and the improvement in Claude and all what have you, that is changing every month. And I think the first one to get there, like Manus, I think would reap the appropriate rewards.
Yeah, and like I think that intuition that you're describing is definitely something I've heard too, and like I think it's probably right. Like, I'm not sure that I would use. I mean, for a wide variety of reasons, I will not be using Manus on a day-to-day basis. But even if I didn't, part of that is like security concerns and things of that kind. But even if I didn't have those concerns, I'm not sure that this is a product, still that I would be using on a day-to-day basis when compared to an agent like OpenAI Deep Research or something like that, or like a Cursor style of product. Like, those things I think actually do have much more genuine day-to-day utility than this. And I also think that, like, if I were an investor in this company, I would be quite concerned that Manus will be, to use Sam Altman's terminology, steamrolled by the next generation of computer use agents from the big labs. I think that's very, very possible. So all that, like, from sort of a practical business technological perspective, I think makes a lot of sense to me.
I mean, the key question that I keep thinking about is there's a reason why, Manus was not built by a YC company 6 months ago, right? And part of this is that we've internalized the fear, Dean, that you talked about. Anything we build will kind of get steamrolled by, Sam Altman. And in some ways, they're right, because like we all know, I'm sure personally, a bunch of like code assist companies who came up a couple of years ago and went bankrupt when but the big labs effectively took over. But I have this like heretical notion that even though everybody talks about agents, nobody actually cares enough about agents in the large labs. And part of that is that they just don't seem to want to build the products beyond just make the model smarter and it'll kind of figure out the products on its own. So in some ways, what that has meant is like we are stuck in this weird realm where I have access to every large model in the world, but half of them can't do half the things because nobody has actually cared. like O1 Pro can't take in documents, or like O3 Mini couldn't take in sort of Python files in the middle or CSVs. Claude can't search the web. I mean, there are these like weird restrictions, partly from the AI safety overhang and partly just because nobody has bothered to sort of add it on in the top. And one big benefit of something like this is, number one, people are trying to actually build agents that would be useful in real life, like booking Amtrak tickets, which is a great eval that I think we should always run on. But what that means is that it pushes the labs or anyone else to say that, like, you know what, we should probably try to do this. We can't just like throw up our hands and say, wait a year and maybe the labs will just build the next big thing. Because if I think about the success story in the West, it's effectively Perplexity. I think that's the one that I think is kind of done the thing that the labs would have been closest to doing, but just never did and got successful, arguendo in kind of doing that. Beyond that, think about the other agents that we normally use. I can only realistically think of like Code Interpreter, which was a couple of years ago maybe, and Claude Code, which just released, which is again a stripped down, pared down version that does a couple of things, and it still can't do the basic stuff like search. So when I look at something like Manus, what I see is not just the fact that, like, yes, they managed to make an agent ecosystem somewhat work comparably using external models or a combination, which is what everybody expected to happen. I'm sure all of us have written about it in the last like couple of years. But more importantly, the fact that they went for it, right? That there is a prize. You have to actually try it. You can give it browser use. You can actually let it go and do things for 4 hours, and you get something useful back. I think it's important to unlock in the product sense.
Yeah, I think there's
Go ahead.
I'll give one more perspective as well, which could be a fun US centric thing. We're in the US, we're very interested in B2B and developer tooling, especially in Silicon Valley. Like we just love developer tools, building for other developers because we feel the pain. And I think in China, maybe there's a little bit more B2C focus, and that actually is to your benefit in terms of finding good use cases.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, what is the previous large software success story that came from China that took over the world? There's TikTok. And that's kind of it. Like, WeChat is amazing, but nobody uses it outside, right? I mean, maybe parts of Southeast Asia. Banking software came up, nobody really. Alibaba, marketplaces kind of exist, but it's not something that has permeated the West in a meaningful sense, I feel like. This might be a sort of completely off-the-wall statement, but I feel AI is one of those things where you can actually build amazing AI agents using the models that are existing from anywhere.
Yeah, I do think
I'm glad we're kind of starting to see that.
I do think it was remarkable how this company has, like, both in its browser, its first product, Monaco, which is like a, ChatGPT search-y like browser, Chrome browser add-on, and this is like the goal was foreign users first. And that, is also like, yeah, if you're running Claude, like that is illegal to use in China. So like that makes it difficult. But, in reading interviews with the CEO over the weekend, he was just like, look, we're not really trying to take on the big labs. We think there's an opportunity. There's a big market here. And, it was kind of sad reading this because he was like, look, there are some things like geopolitics that we can't control. And, but like, I'm just going to try to go out and make the best product I can. And like, I mean, I'm sorry, guy, but like, I really don't think that Chinese AI agents are necessarily that long for the world in the US market, at least. But the skill at which they sort of like played the global influencer marketing game to have this big hype cycle is, reflective of like a real fluency in and like the fact that they could play this game better than any other Western agent one could, except for Devon, which I think was like, tried, but had some challenges of their own. And like, there hasn't really been another big go at this over the past, 2 years or a year and a half, I would say is a remarkable thing to reflect on.
Yeah. And it's actually like, I would go even further. Like, I remember when the first Devon demos happened and people were like, oh my God, look at how cool this thing is. And then it felt like the bubble burst when people realized that it was GPT-4, with prompt engineering and scaffolding. It's like, there's something about the Western AGI obsession that makes us want to build. It's like, we want to conceptualize this as this one godlike model that can do everything. And we kind of implicitly poo-poo like product engineering, like just like doing practical stuff. And you see that I mean, you know, from where I sit, you see that reflected in public policy. What's public policy obsessed with? Big models, giant models. It's obsessed with big data centers and big models and all of this kind of stuff. Because like that's kind of the only thing we seem to really take seriously, and hence value. And I think that there's a kind of AGI, you know, and I'm a deep learning bull, right? Like I'm not the kind of person who's here to tell you that AGI doesn't exist, or, you know, a Gary Marcus fiction or whatever. Like I'm not in that camp at all. But like the AGI obsession has developed into, like, in some ways, it feels to me a bit of a perversion that has distracted us from, I think, opportunities that are laying around on the ground. I'm not saying necessarily like Manus is that opportunity, but I think there's just 1,000 other things where, like, if you cleverly were to string together a bunch of different AI products, different modalities, even different things, like, I think there's all kinds of interesting stuff you could do. We just kind of don't see that happening. And a year ago, I was more inclined to say, at least I don't see it happening. I should say, I don't see that much of it happening. And you know, and to the extent it is happening, I think it's happening in like developer tooling, as you said. It's not happening in like consumer products as much. And I kind of wonder, like, a year ago, I was more inclined to say, well, yeah, it takes time. And a year later, I find myself somewhat less inclined to say that.
So, Shawn, what is this? Are the VCs dumb? Are the founders dumb? Are there actually not pennies to be picked up off the ground?
There are, and the VCs have woken up to it. You know, I started writing about the rise of the AI engineer 2 years ago, and now there's VPs of AI engineering at Bloomberg, at BlackRock, and Morgan Stanley, and they just spoke at my conference last week. And I would say, like, yeah, I think people were very dismissive of the GPT wrapper, you know, kind of viewing it as like a thin layer over the LLM. And I think now the perception is almost even flipped to where, like, the model is the commodity, and actually everything else on top of it is the main value and moat of the product. So I think, like, you know, this is why I started talking about AI engineering. I think that it'll be a job title that'll be growing, and it's kind of what we orient my conference and podcast around. So yeah, I mean, like, it's just music to my ears. Like, you know, I've been saying this for a while now, and I definitely think the VCs have caught up. It's just harder to fund because you can't just go like, oh, here's the pedigree of like the 10 researchers I have, give us $300 million. Now you have to actually look at the apps and see, like, are they well engineered? Do they fit the problem that they're trying to solve? Whether it's B2C, B2B, a lot more difficult than just like, you know, here's a bunch of really cracked researchers and just throw them a lot of money in GPUs and let them go for it. Right? Yeah, that caused like Inflection AI, you know, Stability AI, a bunch of these like mid-tier startups that all just burnt like $100 million each.
I was saying that, like, that's back to the SaaS era in some sense, right? Where you are suddenly find a new vertical niche where you can actually build something, spend a bunch of time and effort, learn a little bit about the problem that you're solving, not just like intelligence, but something more specific, B2C, B2B, then you got to kind of go at it and solve it.
The interesting about this SaaS transition is you're charging on value and not on cost, right? And that is a huge, like, the margins between that is humongous, because I think a lot of us in Silicon Valley realize that, first of all, if you develop your own models, well, the next one that comes out is probably open source from China, and it's better than yours. So where's the value in that? And then second of all, you know, you're charging, like, everything's being competed down to costs. Like, Anthropic offers Claude at cost. OpenAI has a small margin, but otherwise, like, you know, every other GPU provider that's serving open source models are all just providing it at cost because they're trying to capture the market because they have so much money from VCs. Nobody's making margin here, right? But then so, you know, you contrast like the $2 H100 versus the, you know, potentially $2,000 a month, $20,000 a month agents that you can offer, because the comparable is like you're trying to compete against human labor and human thinking time, which we are all rate limited by, and that the economics start to really
speak for yourself, Shawn.
The economics really start to work out. You know, like the fact that, like, you could just You can just start charging for your output instead of charging for your cost of goods sold. I think like that is just fundamentally a better business.
Rona, you wrote a very cool thing about like Google's sort of very awkward struggles to like make products that people use. What is stopping the big model makers from starting to do things that they can charge value-based pricing for? Is it just like they don't need to and they got their hands busy? They got enough on their plate already to making AGI. I mean, it does seem like it's just selling tokens is like not a thing that's going to make you any money in the long run.
It's kind of funny because like if you're one of the large labs, if you're Sam or Dario, you don't care particularly about doing that because you get so much money already coming your way. Anthropic just raised at 60 billion. OpenAI is valued at 300. These are astronomical figures, right? I think we have kind of normalized it in conversation, but these are absurd numbers by any stretch of imagination. $300 billion is bigger than Salesforce. It's insane, like to think about to kind of build for a company. And why are they getting that money? Because they want to build AGI. Why do they think they can build AGI? Partly because they're true believers, partly because they have the best research talent in the world who wants to go build AGI. What happens if you tell those research talent that, you know what, for the next little bit, you're going to have to focus on building agents? Many of them quit. Arguably, many did. So in weird way, like it's only in larger places like Google where you can even potentially see the ability to kind of have a large enough contingent of people go off and try some weird stuff and build cool stuff. And they did. Like Notebook LM is actually really interesting. It was a cool new product, new modality, new way of interacting with information. I am surprised that we didn't see it. And typical Google fashion, it has kind of disappeared after a little while. They have Colab, which is kind of a really interesting product that is languishing in the corner somewhere. Like everything Google does is about creating a very interesting first product and then just kind of slowly killing it by, I don't know, cutting off the oxygen supply over the next, 5 years. And I feel like for somebody to care a lot about building a product here, it has to start right at the top. It has to come from almost like a mission, because the argument against building a product by the engineers on the other side saying just wait a year and everything will get solved, it's really seductive, right? So you really need somebody who has a, I don't know, Jobsian level of ability to push back and say, I don't care what you guys think, we need to actually build something that really works here. And that is just not a muscle that any of these companies have, because none of them have built products. Arguably, the thing that kicked it all off, ChatGPT, was built as a research preview. So what we are doing is all of us are being okay with playing around with research previews that consistently kind of sneak their toe in and pretend they're a bit of a product, but they're not really.
All right, let's fast forward to the near future when agents like can do more economically useful things than book you a train ticket. Should we start with the safety angle? Like, it's just kind of wild if I'm just gonna like let something like exist as me on the internet or in my workplace, and I guess I'm responsible for it. I don't know. Maybe Manus is responsible for it. Maybe OpenAI is responsible for it. Maybe the AI engineer who is just like a grinder who goes to Shawn's conferences is responsible for it. I mean, what like this is a very weird world where it's not just like Jordan Schneider, like AI enhanced worker using chatbots, but like Jordan Schneider, like kind of like letting go a little bit and like having these like automated minions just exist like under my aegis, but also not.
Yeah. I think I haven't checked their website thoroughly, but I would be very surprised if Manus or the company that built it has a safety and security framework or a responsible scaling policy, or has commented on the EU code of practice.
I actually looked for this. I could not find one thing that the CEO has said in any relation to any like safety discussion or question.
No, and this thing, I don't think this thing has any guardrails. I don't think so. I just don't think it's a consideration for them. And so look, like in some sense, that's like probably part of what makes this better than Operator or Claude computer use, because Anthropic and OpenAI have both legitimate business incentive and also like internal stakeholders who are just not going to let the company do. You sort of like ship things with no guardrails. There's reputational risk. There's like, if OpenAI had released something with something like Operator with zero guardrails, you'd be looking at state attorneys general investigating you and FTC and whoever else coming after you, just like they did with ChatGPT, by the way. The tech industry is just, I don't have hard numbers on this, but like it's got to be pretty risk averse on things like this because it's a risky endeavor. It's an inherently risky endeavor. And so there's some ways in which that's like good. Those are like market incentives. Because you should not be incentivized as a consumer or a business user to throw agents out into the wild who do things for you and like maybe like cause problems, like there should be some liability for that. You should be incentivized not to do such things. And companies should also be incentivized not to release such things. So I kind of think that there's an interesting future here. I've been thinking a lot about this in the last few months about liability and things like this. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that like the court system is just going to really struggle. Like if something happened with Manus, okay, like, so there's the user that put it into practice that like actually prompted it. There's like multiple LLMs behind the scene. And there's also the fact that it's like a Chinese company that is almost certainly like not, like it's probably not a legally cognizable claim unless you want to go to court in Beijing. Like, how is the American tort liability system going to figure this out? I'm skeptical that it is going to do a very good job at that. But no liability is a moral failing too. So the way I kind of think about this is that as the cost of cognitive labor declines, like one of the only things that's left that we know has economic value is something like trust and pricing risk. And things of this kind. And so I kind of like wonder if like frontier AI companies are going to like slowly converge to being something more like insurance companies or something more like financial services companies almost, in the sense that like those are the things that financial services and insurance are based on trust, and the pricing and allocation, pricing of risk and allocation of responsibility for harm that occurs as a result of realized risks. That kind of feels to me like what actually is economically valuable here, and like certainly not the selling of marginal tokens.
There's one proof point that basically I think maybe agrees on some level, which is that we'll never get the O3 API because OpenAI is choosing to release products instead of APIs. And that makes sense if you believe your APIs are valuable, is you stop giving it to everyone else. And it seems like that's what they're doing, which is pretty cool. And also it stops the Manuses of the world dead in their tracks, because now you can no longer use their APIs, and that's great. So, I would say that I think agrees with you. The other approach, I think, in broadening out in terms of this general safety thing, I think this is just a argument for sort of American AI accelerationism. The simple fact of the matter is, if you are more safe, the way I phrase this is that there can be no unilateral safety in AI. If you are more safe and you stop yourself from doing anything, then China will do it first, and then then you're behind. It's better to like be ahead and be in control of the narrative, build in the safeguards at the LLM layer with the post training that you do, and try to be ahead, but to lead the way by being in front instead of leading from the back.
I have a more of a contrarian view with this, which is that I think even the framing of this in terms of safety is incorrect, because I think we are kind of what are we talking about today, right? The Manus of today or operator of today or whatever, these are not like safety concerns. There are engineering concerns, there are misuse concerns, I think safety, we are using the 2023 version of AI safety, which kind of seeps into every part of anything a model can do can be unsafe kind of conversation. And I think that distorts the way we have to discuss sort of what any of these products do. So the way I think about it is look, as Dean said, the liability issue is important, right? Like it's really critical once it starts getting used inside companies. Like if inside Pfizer, somebody uses Manus to figure something out and creates a wrong drug, there's a set of liability issues that have to happen. If somebody inside Cloudflare uses something like Manus to fix a bug and creates an outage like what happened, somebody is to, like, there are a set of like clear questions where we can figure out where that sits. But we are still at the point of making these damn things work properly in the first place. I mean, think about the example we started with. You tested them out for like, can you book me an Amtrak ticket? Like, these are not, we are not yet at the point where AI agents are so incredibly amazing that we kind of have to restrict them ahead of time before they engage. I would like to see them work properly before we leash them. That is not to say that we should not have a parallel side that thinks about these problems of like, where does the liability lie or tort lie? Should it be at the user level? But I think in many ways, these are going to be exactly like in the economy, hard-won battles, like pushes the frontier forward one issue at a time, as opposed to like, we figured it out, guys. This is where it's going to be, and it'll work for anything from, me searching for medical information to you booking an Amtrak ticket to, somebody writing a piece of open source code and putting it out there, or like writing malware or something. I feel like one extremely problematic outcome of like the way these discussions have happened in the last few years have been that we've conflated all of these issues into one issue, and they're not, right? I mean, they're extremely sort of disaggregated ones. So in some ways, I look at Manus and go like, good. I'm glad somebody without a responsible scaling policy is at least showing us what can be done, because there is no bloody reason why giving something a browser as a problem. Like, it's not there. Yes, there can be prompt injection attacks. That's on you. That's a problem. We need to figure out a way to solve it, but we can't figure it out without anybody actually doing anything. So I kind of feel there's a chicken and egg issue.
I guess yeah, and I also completely agree that like if you're a dentist trying to use AI to automate business processes within your dental practice, then like probably the fact that OpenAI has an RSP that says what they're going to do to evaluate biological weapons risk is not like that important for you, right? But perhaps more problematically is the fact that OpenAI's model spec says follow the law. Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yeah, no, like my own view, I this is not a legal podcast, so I won't go into like too much detail on this, but like my own view is that we have to completely reject, not completely, but almost entirely reject the tort liability system for this, because I just don't think it's just too complicated of an issue, and we need to let this is the kind of thing where like transacting parties need to like come to agreement about what makes sense in particular contexts, and like just let contracts do their thing. We're not gonna, the courts are not gonna adjudicate this on a case by case basis in any way that's effective. But I would say the risk of accelerationism is that you accelerate. Noam Shazir left Google to accelerate so that he could go found Character AI, right? And what happened? Well, Character AI said problematic things to children. It made sexual advances to children, and a kid killed himself. And I don't really know if you could say that Character AI is responsible for that child's suicide, but he was talking to the chatbot when he killed himself. That's a tort case. It is one, Tristan Harris is funding it. It's a tort liability case in the state of Florida. And that's going to be a sympathetic jury. That's going to be a sympathetic judge. And what's Character AI now? Well, it's a husk, right? Noam Shazir's gone. He's back at Google. And it's a husk. It's a husk, that's going to be quite possibly picked apart in tort litigation. And there's other cases against them too. So I think if you accelerate without figuring this out, there is a chance, as they say, bad facts make bad law. And there's a chance that something very bad happens. And maybe it's not unambiguously the AI model's fault, but it's a really nasty appearing set of facts. And as a result of that, you get adverse judgments in American courts. And the common law is path dependent. So, you could end up with a very bad outcome pretty quickly here. So yeah, I think that is, I agree that like accelerating the adoption and like diffusion, I think Manus is very much a diffusion story. I'm like very, very enthusiastic about that. But I do think that if we don't in parallel try to work on some of these risk assignment not safety, really, not like catastrophic risk safety stuff, but more just like the general, like who is responsible for when stuff happens. Like unless we make meaningful progress on that in parallel, I think we could end up in a pretty bad situation kind of rapidly.
Are you of the opinion that it is primarily financial infrastructure that is needed? Like your Model S as insurance companies? You are. Because
legal and financial. Yeah, I think what
Right.
you basically need is like a contracting mechanism that is perhaps AI enabled, AI negotiated contracts, perhaps AI adjudicated contracts, so you don't have to go to the expense of the normal court system. And then once you have contracts, like once you have liabilities on the balance sheet, well, then all of a sudden you're in fund
Finance
derivatives. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're in derivatives territory,
But
and
you
it
should
becomes it's a New York problem, not a San Francisco problem at that point.
you should see the
Make Wall
face
Street
that
happy.
Jordan and I made when you said AI adjudicated.
Yeah. This is an AGI pilled idea for sure. Like I would not do this with Claude 3.7, even though I think Claude 3.7 is great. But I think we could get there. I think in the next couple of years we could get to the point that the models are capable of doing things like this. So this is just one way to approach it. Certainly not the only one, and it's a nascent idea for me. But I do kind of think like this seems. And the other thing is like this could be where the money actually is, right? Like pricing risk and transforming risk is like something that we're better at that than China is.
Oh yeah, we're
We are
fantastic.
way better. We're fantastic at that. And like it's weird because actually like a lot of my Republican friends here in DC hate that fact, right? They view finance as decadent. So does Xi, for that matter. So does Chairman Xi. But I kind of think like, interesting. There might be trillions of dollars of wealth to be created here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, any finance asset is based on the laws that it is grounded in, and I think the laws have to be figured out here. There's a bit of a chicken and egg with that.
Yes,
and like,
but
so
if you have contracts, contracts would form a substantial part of the
they
law.
need to
and,
be
like,
litigated still. These like, yeah. Okay, but like I think one measure that I'd be interested to plot, if you can create this plot, it'd be really interesting, is the plot of AGI timelines versus legislative timelines, right? Like the time it takes to
That's dark.
right, the time it takes to make law.
Like this or like this?
Exactly. Well, I think it's going the exact opposite way. We're accelerating in AI progress, and we're decelerating in law and like Supreme Court resolutions of cases or whatever, right? Like I don't know what metric makes sense, but you can see what I mean. Like we have our legal infrastructure needs to keep up with AI progress, or we're fucked.
I completely agree. That's the problem I try to get my head around all the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we saw the EU just like try and completely fall on their face, which was not like a good first
Yeah.
effort for democracies.
The problem is
I
like
will-
you don't
sorry.
want to do a statute prematurely. Like you don't want to do a statute with a bunch of technical assumptions embedded in it prematurely. It's like a very narrowly targeted thing. And I think really, I don't know, for me at least, this is all kind of clicking into place. And I think if we got this done in the next 2 years, we'd be fine.
So I think like the future of like agents in China is also going to be a really interesting one. And, there was an argument 2 years ago that like LLMs were going to have a hard time gaining traction in China because the government would freak out that it's really hard to align them to not say like anti-party things. But this is like basically a solved problem. I'm curious for your guys's perspectives on like the technical challenge of, not just at like a legal level, figuring out how to assign blame, but, at a product and operational level of like building things that like governments and like large companies are even going to be comfortable with. I mean, is this just like a matter of time? Is there anything like fundamentally difficult, like requiring major breakthroughs? Like once we have the technology to make Operator and Manus do really good stuff, like will they be able to be controlled as well?
I'd be curious for you to correct this assumption if I'm wrong, Jordan. But like my impression of China is that it's actually like a somewhat kind of more ice cold libertarian country when it comes to liability stuff, where like there is a certain like greater like developing country sort of shit happens.
Yeah, until
mentality.
bad things happen and then like your company gets shut down. So
If it hits,
Let me-
no. Like it's more binary. It's more of a binary outcome. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me take this in a different direction. Agents in the context of JD Vance saying, we refuse to view AI as a purely disruptive technology that will inevitably automate away our labor force. We believe and will fight for policies that ensure that AI is going to make our workers more productive. We want AI to be supplementing, not replacing work done by Americans.
By the way, this is something that AI engineers worry about a lot. So a surprising number of them are actually worried for their own jobs, which is very interesting. So I think the main idea for this is whether or not you have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset view of the world, whether or not you have an idea that human desires tend to expand over time. Whenever we reach a certain bar, we immediately move that goalpost, one football field away. And so the idea is that, yes, it'll take away jobs that exist today, but we will create the jobs of tomorrow. And ideally, those are the jobs that we want to do more of anyway.
I agree. I think to a large extent, that sentiment is the most normal politician sentiment in the world, which is basically technological growth is great. We're going to continue making everyone's lives better. And it's the same thing people have said sort of for a very long time. I think the difference here is that there's at least a contingent of people who look at that and go, no, this time it's different, right? Like that you might say it's not disruptive, but it's going to be massively disruptive in a short period of time to a large segment of society. So it's not just agriculture getting mechanized, but it's all white collar jobs getting mechanized or something. At least sort of when I've looked at it, I don't think this is going to happen immediately. The number of barriers in front of us that are technological, regulatory, sociological are large enough that I don't think all of us are going to necessarily be unemployed in like 5 years. I think there is enough things to do. If nothing else, we'll have to fight, what Shawn said about the inevitable complications of regulatory worlds. Like we have to push that forward before sort of these things get deployed everywhere. So to some extent, at least like when I did some, rough math, we are still going to be bottlenecked by chips and energy in like 10 years. And that's going to stop us from replacing all labor with AGI or AI agents. Does that mean that there will be no disruption to society? Hell no. I 100% expect there to be disruption. Already we have AI that can plausibly replace large chunks of, specific white collar tasks that I do, you guys do, legislators do, Supreme Court does. I mean, pick your poison. We can probably replace a chunk of them with like a Claude 3.7 call and get better results. So we are already in that world, but it's not going to happen immediately. So JD Vance kind of has to toe the party line, right? Anti-AI, safety people, acceleration, technological optimism all the way, and I'm all for it. But to some extent, I'm not parsing a sentence with any deeper meaning than like, let's go.
I find myself more worried about slow diffusion due to not just like to say the bottlenecks are just regulatory. Yeah, they are regulatory, but there's like so many other bottlenecks that I'm much more worried about the sort of diffusion and actual creative use gets slowed. I'm worried about the uses of LLMs that no one's ever thought of, and I'm worried that no one's ever going to think of them. And so I think that's probably the bigger concern that we should be addressing through public policy. In the longer term, and when I say that in AI time, that's like 3 years, but like, I do think that there's a possibility that in particular, some elite human capital might just get automated in different ways. And I am cognizant of the fact that the most political instability tends to emerge when you have overproduction of elites in a society. We already have that problem. We've already significantly overproduced elites in America. And I worry that will get worse. And I think that when you combine that with like other political problems that America faces, you could have a tipping point type of phenomenon. So it's not I wouldn't dismiss it entirely as a risk, but I think my default assumption would be that the risk is actually on the other side, not diffusing fast enough.
I have this thesis that I sometimes hold that like markets that get extremely liquid end up with polarized outcomes. I think we've generally seen that for capital markets, globalization has meant that some companies get extremely large and the middle kind of gets decimated, which is why most of the gains come from Max 7. We could very easily see something similar happen sort of in labor markets, right? We already see sort of flashes of it. Like if you think about engineering salaries, there's a bit of a bimodal distribution there that's happening up. Lawyers kind of have it. And once you have AI coming into the picture, we might just have a very vast, much more liquid labor market than you would have ever expected, which sounds kind of nice, except for the fact that it does result in a bit of a power law and a distribution. So polarization is hard to deal with when it's in domains that we don't really know how to handle very cleanly or like cut the minimum of.
Any closing thoughts?
I don't know if we've answered the question that you're likely to put on the title of your episode, which is this a second DeepSeek moment? And for what it's worth, my answer is no, but I don't know if anyone's leaning the other way.
Mine too. In some sense, I think it's actually like more interesting than DeepSeek. And in another sense, it's like certainly not as impressive of a technical achievement as DeepSeek.
I'll argue for yes, because I think DeepSeek was a DeepSeek moment for like core infra research talent. Manus is closer to DeepSeek for product. And I'm glad like we're pushing a second boundary as opposed to sort of pushing the same boundary.
Beautiful.
All right. Well, I think we'll end it there. Maybe I'll Shawn is dialing in from Malaga, so I'll find some Spanish tunes to take us out on. Thank you so much for being a part of ChinaTalk, everyone.
Always a pleasure.
My absolute pleasure, guys.